This week in wrestling news, Penn State annihilated Ohio State. Sebastian Rivera jumps up to wrestle number one Stevan Micic. Zahid Valencia gets pinned. And could the SEC have a wrestling program? So let me stop stalling and start talking wrestling. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Fanco Wrestling Show. My name is Josiah and I can't wait to get into today's topics because there's been some massive happenings in the world of wrestling. So without further ado, let's jump right into today's show. The first topic on today's list is Penn State annihilated Ohio State wrestling. Now I was at this match and it was great. It lived up to the expectations. Now I will say that this match wasn't as great as last match as far as hype levels, but it was still super exciting. And of course, we know that Penn State won this match 28, beating Ohio State 28-9. This was a big win for the program, considering Ohio State is the number 2 ranked wrestling team right now. So let me just run through these lineups. I mean, of course, we know some of the big matchups. Bo Nickel versus Colin Moore was perhaps the biggest match, but I'm just going to run down these lineups and talk a little bit about each match. So first off is at 125. Now the match actually started at 133, which I thought was a little bit strange considering that, you know, some of the upper weights could have been some of the bigger matchups. 125 wasn't necessarily a big end match, but they could have picked straws or coaches decided just to start at 133. That's just kind of how it happened. So anyways, I'm just going to run back 125, which was the last match. Heinzelman of Ohio State actually ended up decisioning Schnupp. He beat him 7-4. This was, you know, a decent match considering these are 2 unranked wrestlers. But you know, that's really all I have to say about that. But I do still have major props for Schnupp going out there and wrestling his hardest. 133. This match started off huge. I mean, this was a major upset when Roman Bravo Young, who's ranked number 16th, or he was before he beat Luke Pletcher in overtime. This, to be honest with you, this wasn't a great match at first. I mean, there were some flurries which were nice, but it really wasn't a high-scoring match. The score wasn't really, you know, all that great, but then Roman Bravo Young pulled it out in overtime, beating Luke Pletcher, and this just shakes things up more at 133. I mean, 133 has been a tough weight class all season with Fix, with Suriano, with Pletcher, with Philippi, and now you throw Roman Bravo Young. I said he was an underrated wrestler, and right now he's proven me right. So then the action continued at 141 pounds whenever Nick Lee wrestled Joey McKenna, and Joey McKenna is number 2 in the nation, or was, before Nick Lee, number 7, ended up beating him by a score of 7-6. And to be honest with you, this score, Joey McKenna just kind of gassed out at the end of the match. He was he was dominating Lee up until that second and third period. Now, some may say that McKenna, he needed to go out there. He knew he needed to score some bonus points for his team after Pletcher lost, and that's understandable. But, you know, to me, he just looked gassed, and he just looked like he didn't have that tank to be out there. And so Nick Lee came off with a big win. And going into the next match at 149 pounds. So this match, Micah Jordan wrestled Verclaren of Penn State, and what a doozy of a match. This ended up being a decision. Ohio State won. Micah Jordan won this match, but it was close, and the score shows that he won, but what was shown out on the mat may have been otherwise. Of course, Micah Jordan is number 3 in the country. Verclaren is currently unranked and will probably remain unranked after this week, considering it was a loss. But he showed some great moves out there, hitting some super ducks, hitting some nice takedowns. Now, there were some really blatantly dumb stalling calls as far as I'm concerned. I think, you know, Verclaren got hit with 3 stalling calls during this match, who I think were a bit absurd and didn't really deserve to be stall calls, but you know, that's just kind of what ran into the match. Then Nolf, you know, he goes out there, tech falls, big win for him, continuing with bonus points. One funny thing during the commentary of this match was whenever the announcer said that he had a 4.5 GPA. For you watching at home, you may have heard the announcer say that you can't get above a 4.0 in college. I don't know any colleges where you can do that, but apparently Nolf is scoring bonus points in school and just like he does in wrestling, which is pretty darn funny. And at 165 pounds, Vincenzo Joseph majors Tayshawn Campbell of Ohio State. This just continues with the bonus points for Penn State and shows why they're such a dominant program. At 174, Mark Hall beats number 18, Ethan Smith. This was actually a pretty close match, closer than a lot of the Penn State fans would have liked at first. Even though Mark Hall came out with a major decision, he was looking okay at first, but then he turned it on in the third period. And I think that's where Mark Hall can separate himself from a lower ranked guy like Ethan Smith, is that Mark Hall just keeps pushing. He got about 5 takedowns within 30 seconds in the third period to get that major decision, which was very impressive on Mark Hall's part. So then at 184 pounds, Finally, Ohio State gets a nice big win whenever Miles Martin pulls out the major decision against Mason Manville of Penn State. We didn't have Shakur Rasheed out there for Penn State this week, which, it could have been an injury, could have been whatever else, which, a lot of Penn State fans were a little bit upset not to see Shakur out there, considering he's pretty high ranked. But Mason Manville gave him a little bit of battle, ended up getting majored 18-6 by Miles Martin, who is a national finalist from last year, and he'll probably be there again this year. At 197 pounds, perhaps the biggest match of the night. It was hyped up to be the biggest match of the night, considering it was number 1 versus number 2, Bo Nickel versus Colin Moore, and fans were expecting a big match. And they got a big match in a minute and 30 seconds whenever Bo Nickel pinned Colin Moore. This just blows my mind that you have the number 1 ranked kid in the country, number 1 ranked kid, and the number 2 ranked kid, and the number 1 Bo Nickel pins Colin Moore in the first period. You're kidding me. He helps Colin Moore up after the match. Obviously, Moore is pissed off. I mean, understandable. This could have, helped out the team a little bit here. More for himself, though, going after that national title. Nickel here may have just locked up his national title, may have locked up the Hodge Trophy. Of course, it's been a big competition this season between Nolf or Nickel. Right now, just to read off a couple stats. So, Penn State, Nickel has 13 pins on the season. He's 19-0, and he has 1 match only where he didn't get bonus. Whereas Nolf has 18 matches out of 20 where he got bonus points. He's 20-0. He's a couple less pins than Nickel, but I mean, these two are just dominant forces in wrestling, and we'll see who ends up getting that trophy. But then let's continue on to the last match, the final match of the night. Anthony Cassar got the major decision against number 17, Singletary from Ohio State. He looked strong out there. He just looked like he was manhandling Singletary. He won 18-8, and Cassar, I believe, is going to make some noise at Nationals. So, going into the overall match breakdown, this was a big win for Penn State and a big upset for Ohio State. And not upset in the terms that Ohio State should have won or anything. I predicted the score being 23-13. Flow Wrestling predicted the score being 19-18, 18-18, which I thought was pretty absurd. I didn't think the match was ever going to be that close. But whenever Penn State ran away with this match, 28-9, that's just saying something about that, how dominant Cale Sanderson is as a wrestling coach. He trains these wrestlers to be their best at the top level. Every single one of them are showing some grit out there. Whereas on the other side, you have Tom Ryan. And the Ohio State fans kind of turned a little bit against him. And I'm not saying every Ohio State fan turned against him. I'm saying I saw a lot of flack against Tom Ryan, Ohio State's head wrestling coach, which is understandable. It's understandable whenever you get smacked down and just canceled out like that, where people start calling for the coach to be fired. I don't think he should be fired at all. When you're going up against Penn State, who's the top caliber team, and you get beat that bad, I mean, a couple of those matches could be flipped. That Pletcher, Rowan Bravo Young match, that could be flipped. The Joey McKenna, Nick Lee match, if you flip those, the score is a little bit closer. I mean, Ohio State's still not winning, but you're a little bit closer. That would actually make the score 22-15, which is a little bit closer to my prediction and makes Tom Ryan look a little bit better. But yeah, I think everybody just needs to calm down a little bit. Yes, Ohio State lost to Penn State. Yes, they lost to Michigan, but they're still going to do very well at the NCAA tournament come March, and I don't think anybody has anything to worry about with Tom Ryan. Now, that marks 56 straight dual meet wins for Penn State, and I just have to say, congratulations to the team. I can't wait to see Penn State win another national title. It's very exciting. It was a very exciting atmosphere, and I'm pumped up for the rest of the season. So let's get into the next topic, which is Sebastian Rivera, number one kid at 125, bumps up to wrestle the number one kid at 133 pounds, Stevan Micic. Nobody saw this coming this week. I mean, this caught me by total surprise to get this super duel, or super match, I should call it. The last Penn State Ohio State was a super duel. Sebastian Rivera versus Stevan Micic is a super match. And, we had this last year when Bryce Meredith wrestled Seth Gross. Seth Gross, of course, bumped up from 133 to 141 to wrestle Bryce Meredith. Meredith ended up coming away with that match 4-2, but it grew the sport of wrestling. It hyped up the sport of wrestling. Both guys put their records on the line, which a lot of guys aren't gutsy enough to do. And that's why I have to say Sebastian Rivera has some big gonads, some big kahunas for bumping up to wrestle Micic, because you don't see this happening very often. When it happened last year, it was a once in a lifetime event, and maybe this can be a little bit more popular. So as far as the results of the match, Micic ended up winning the match 11-4, and Micic just showed complete dominance. And when you're going up against a Sebastian Rivera, who's a number one ranked kid at 125, took out Spencer Lee a couple of weeks ago, that's really, really showing the level that Micic is on right now. He wants that national title. He really is aiming to be a national champ, and he deserves it after that performance. We'll see what happens at nationals. But the crazy thing here is, Rivera is only a sophomore. Micic is a junior. Rivera is a sophomore, and some people may start questioning, and I've seen people commenting already, is that Lee didn't wrestle Rivera at the dual meet whenever Northwestern wrestled Iowa a couple weeks ago. But you see Sebastian Rivera bumping up, putting his 20-0 record on the line to wrestle Micic. Does that say something about Lee? No. No, let me tell you right now, that Lee decision, as I've said before, that was a total coach's decision. That was not on Spencer Lee. Knowing Spencer Lee, the type of athlete that he is, he's not afraid of anything, and nor should he be afraid of anything with the type of wrestler that he is. I think that everybody needs to leave Lee alone a little bit. He'll show his grit come Big Tens, come Nationals, whenever he gets his rematch against Rivera. But I will say that Rivera showed a lot of courage here, bumping up, and it grows the sport of wrestling, and I love seeing things like that. So as far as the dual meet turned out, Michigan actually ended up winning the dual meet pretty handily. The score was 30-9. Michigan won that dual meet, but overall it was a great and exciting match. And on to the next topic. Austin Desanto is suspended from wrestling, or he was this past weekend. Whenever Desanto, the team was wrestling Maryland, and he was suspended because of his actions, his previous actions in past matches. And this, to make this clear, this was not an NCAA sanctioned thing that went with Desanto. This was a coach's decision. Again, this was a brand's coaching decision that Desanto needed to be suspended for a match, and this was because of his actions. As I said, this has kind of added up. First, whenever he wrestled Lezak about a month ago, he was pounding his chest because it was a big win. Okay, some people may let that go. Some people thought it was a little bit over the top. Whatever you thought, maybe a little bit unsportsmanlike. Then, whenever he wrestled Soriano, he was storming around the mat again, pounding his chest, getting all excited, and people really got on him and said that this was pretty unacceptable. But that still did not get him suspended. The match that got him suspended was whenever he went around in the Nebraska match, Iowa versus Nebraska, and he was going shh, shh to the crowd after he beat somebody in the duel, and he beat an unranked Brian Pesca of Nebraska, but the crowd was jeering him the whole time. They were jeering him, Desanto that is, and just calling things out. And Desanto, I guess, I don't know if he can't handle it. He kind of plays into it. He likes it a little bit, but he went shh, and then the worst part, what really probably brought him down, was he made the slit throat hand gesture. He slit his throat to the crowd, and that was pretty much the final straw for Brands. Now, Desanto did apologize for his actions, and you got to give him a little bit of credit for that. He apologized. He knows that he gets caught up in the emotions sometimes, which, any guy out there can get caught up in the emotions, and that's understandable. Is this a little bit unsportsmanlike? Yeah, I'd say a bit so, but it's kind of an Iowa mentality. You had Thomas Gilman a couple years ago who's doing similar things on and off the mat. He was making these type of gestures and calling people out. But the crazy thing was, this wasn't really even a big, match to do it against. First of all, he's in Nebraska. He's doing it against an unranked wrestler. The team won 20-13, so they won pretty handily, so it was kind of unnecessary. But the match that Desanto missed this past week was against Maryland, and Iowa, of course, won that duel really bad. They won 48-0 against Maryland. The guy that stepped in for Desanto was Paul Glenn at 133 pounds. He pinned Orion Anderson of Maryland. And so I guess Desanto wasn't really needed for this duel. So, Brands is getting criticized a little bit for saying, why can't you, suspend him for a big duel? Why does it have to be against Maryland? It's fine. He deserved to get suspended for a match based on the coach's decision. It's over now. Let's hope that he doesn't have any more crazy antics on the mat. We'll see what happens at Nationals with the crazy crowded weight class at 133 pounds. And, it is really exciting to see what Desanto does next. And I'm actually really excited to see what ends up happening, because he will wrestle against Indiana next, then Wisconsin, and then Oklahoma State against Fix. That will be a massive, massive match. And on to the next topic, which is making its rounds in the wrestling community. Hayden Halter was disqualified from his wrestling tournament after a couple unsportsmanlike calls. And if you haven't seen this, I'll link to this in the description below. I'll link the article so you can read all about it. But this was kind of crazy to see. So Hayden Halter, he's a wrestler at Burlington High School, which is a high school in Wisconsin. He wrestles for the WIAA. That's his conference in Wisconsin. He won the 106 pounds Wisconsin State Championship last year as a freshman. This year, he's a sophomore. Now, he ended up transferring to Waterford High School, bumped up. He's wrestling 120 pounds now. So, let's get into what exactly happened. Now, he was wrestling Cade Willis of Union Grove, and this was at a conference tournament, individual tournament. What happened was Halter was up 7-1. He's beating Willis 7-1, and at the end of the match, what happened is there were like 2 seconds left. Looked like Halter gave Willis the escape. He was just kind of getting up. Halter kind of goes like this to the ref and is questioning the ref's call. Ref goes, "That's one unsportsmanlike. Don't question my decision." Okay. So, that's fine. Question the decision. He won the match. So let's move on. Well, then Halter hit him with a flex after he won, and the ref wasn't having it. He said, "That's it. That's 2 unsportsmanlikes for flexing. You're disqualified." Now the fans went wild. Halter was utterly confused. I mean, he had no idea what had just happened to him. The parents were freaking out. Coaches were freaking out. There were refs that had to keep the crowd quiet. They were specifically telling the crowd to be quiet during this interaction. And that was a little bit crazy to me that Halter got hit with this unsportsmanlike for flexing. You see Mark Hall after the Penn State match against Ohio State, and he hit the crowd with a flex. There was no unsportsmanlike there. Now, of course, it's up to the ref's discretion whether that's unsportsmanlike. Maybe after questioning his decision, he thought, he shouldn't be flaunting around. Now, Halter went on record. He said that he was just excited to win the match, and what he ended up saying was, the official said I was flexing. This is Halter in Halter's words. He got interviewed after. Halter said, the official said I was flexing towards the end and taunting them, but I was flexing at my dad because I just won the match and I was excited. They have the refs take this opportunity to go to state away from me. It's personal. And that's the biggest thing here is not only was Halter disqualified from the match, he was disqualified from wrestling the rest of the individual season. So he's out of his conference championship. He can't go to the state tournament as a returning state champ. That is unbelievable. It's one thing where, maybe you take away his conference title, but to not let the kid wrestle the rest of the season based on one ref's call, that is completely, in my opinion, it's wrong. And, I've gathered all the facts that I could from this. People are saying, you got to look at both sides, see what's going on. The kid was happy after the match. Should he have questioned the ref's decision? No. He should have kept his mouth shut, just like I believe a lot of wrestlers should. They shouldn't be questioning the ref's call. Let the coach do the talking. And especially after you won 7-1, it's not like he's going to get a major decision or anything, or that it even really had any effect. So that is just horrible officiating there, or horrible, I shouldn't say officiating, horrible WIAA Wisconsin rules that he can't wrestle the rest of the season. Now the referee was Michael Arndt, and he's not going on the record saying anything yet. He's actually, him and possibly the tournament are being sued by Halter's parents and coaches. They have a lawyer, a little bit absurd, but I understand it's after a state championship. Now, what's interesting is that Halter can wrestle in the team tournament, and the team tournament takes place actually kind of around the same time, but ends after the individual state tournament. This is backwards, I know, from at least what happened in Pennsylvania. Every state is a little bit different, but this is really strange that the team tournament takes place after individuals, so he can compete in that, but not his individual tournament. That's strange in my opinion, but overall, this is just an unnecessary, a horrible decision that I think could have totally been avoided. One, had Halter kept his mouth shut after the match, or two, let the kid wrestle for the rest of the season. I mean, come on, Wisconsin, get your stuff together. So let's get on to the last, major topic for the other wrestling matches of the week. So what are the other wrestling matches of the week that happened? We had a major match when Daniel Lewis pinned number 2, Zahid Valencia. What a match. I cannot believe that this happened. Zahid has been shown to be a total machine over the past couple of years. He was a national champion last year. He lost in the semis the year before. And, to see this kid get pinned is just something. It's just unreal. Now, Daniel Lewis, he's 19-1 on the season thus far. His only loss is to Miles Amin. And what we'll probably see is these rankings. Miles Amin will probably bump up to number 2. Daniel Lewis will most likely be the number 3 ranked kid, and Zahid will probably be around that 4. He'll probably be 4, which is where he deserves to be. And so this will be really interesting in the rankings of NCAAs. But now what happens is he'll end up wrestling number 7 Joe Smith at the Oklahoma State Duels, and their next competition will be probably at NCAAs. So Lewis he's shown that he's in that hunt for a national title too, and it'll be really exciting come March to see what happens. The next match of the week that I want to talk a little bit about is at 157 pounds. So Tyler Berger of Nebraska wrestled number 10 Steve Belize, and this match went into sudden victory. Now Belize is number 10 in the country right now, and Berger is number 2 at 157 pounds. And both of these wrestlers, they got escapes, so the score was 1-1. Went into sudden victory, and Berger ended up coming out, getting the takedown, and winning the match. So this is a pretty exciting match to have that takedown. And, you know, it wasn't an upset or anything, but it shows that there are some tough guys at that weight who are looking for a title. In another match that happened at 125 pounds was number 13, Vitaly Aruja. And I believe that's how you pronounce the name. Vitaly Aruja pins number 10, Patrick Glory of Princeton. This is a big match, and to be honest with you, this 125-pounder from Cornell, Aruja, he was off my radar, and he is right on it right now for somebody looking to All-American this year at 125 pounds. He pinned Glory, who's known to be a force to reckon with, in 4 minutes, about 4.5 minutes. And right now, Aruja, who's number 13, is 20-1 on the season. Now, he doesn't have any major wins this season besides this pin against Glory, but he's shown that he's 20-1. Now, the interesting thing is last year, whenever he was, right now he's a freshman, if that says anything. Last year, when he was a redshirt, he beat Mickey Philippi at an open tournament. He actually, I believe he majored him at the open tournament, which was pretty big considering, Philippi right now is one of the top in the country at 133 pounds. So if Aruja can keep this up, he'll definitely All-American this year. And finally, the last match I want to get into, it wasn't an individual match, but more of a team duel. Pitt versus NC State. So NC State is number 8 in the country. Pitt is unranked currently. So Pitt stunned them when they beat them 18-16. What a match. There were some big upsets on Pitt's side. And of course you need those upsets whenever you have to beat a ranked team. And Pitt pulled it off. Going through some of the big wins. Of course, NC State got big wins at 149 pounds. Number 7, Justin Oliver, got a major decision. At 157, Hayden was a number 4 kid. He is a number 4 kid. He decision number 16, Romani of Pitt, as was expected. Now, Romani kept it pretty close, which, kept Hidlay away from getting bonus points, who as a top 5 ranked wrestler in the country, he should be getting bonus points. So when Romani can keep that close, that helps out the match significantly. At 165 pounds, Thomas Bullard of NC State got a decision. And the major upset, the biggest upset of the match, was when Nino Bonacorsi beat number 2 Nick Reenan at 184 pounds. Now, Bonacorsi of Pitt is ranked number 12, and he's had some big wins. Last week, he just beat Chip Ness. This week, beating the number 2 ranked kid in the country, Nick Reenan. That just stunned the crowd and really showed that Nino's in this for an All-American, and that helped out the team score a lot. Moving up a weight, Kellen Stout, who's from around the Pittsburgh area, same with Nino Bonacorsi. Kellen Stout upsets number 17, Malik McDonald. Now, this was a little bit less of an upset, but, when somebody can beat a ranked wrestler as an unranked wrestler, that's a nice win right there. So Kellen Stout pulled out the win there. And then at heavyweight, Demetrius Thomas, who Brennan and I actually said in another one of our videos is somebody to look to as an underrated wrestler coming into NCAAs. He got the major decision against NC State. So this helped Pitt, all these bonus points, all these upsets helped Pitt to win 18-16. Against number 8 NC State, and Pitt should now be a ranked team. So let's finally get into some fan questions. So these are the comments and questions that you guys asked me to make a video about. And so I'm super excited to get into this. Make sure if you have any questions of any kind or want me to make a video, you leave a comment down below. So this first question is about the SEC and wrestling. So let's read this fan question. This question comes from Justin Thomas TM, and he asks, should the SEC join the collegiate wrestling scene? This is a really interesting question because, as you may know, college wrestling conferences are slightly different from football conferences in that the SEC, there's no SEC conference in wrestling. There is, however, one SEC team that's typically in football. They're in the SEC. That is not in the SEC in wrestling, but they are in another conference. Leave a comment down below if you know what that team is. I'll reveal the answer in a bit, but leave a comment below to let me know if you know which team that is. So let's get into this. The SEC teams, as you may know, Alabama, Auburn, Ole Miss, University of Texas, Texas A&M, Georgia, LSU, the University of Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, Vanderbilt, Missouri. So those are, there are a couple more teams, but those are the big powerhouse teams of the SEC. So, fun fact, there used to be SEC wrestling. Justin Thomas, who asked this question, just to let you know, there used to be SEC wrestling. This is something that I didn't know, as a matter of fact, that when I looked into this a bit, I found some more information. So let's get into what killed SEC wrestling. There are two words I have for you that killed SEC wrestling. Title IX. Title IX is what annihilated, eliminated, completely canceled SEC wrestling. Now, what is Title IX? For those of you who don't know, Title IX came into effect many years back, and it deemed that every college has to have the same amount of men's scholarships as they do for women's scholarships for collegiate athletics. So this means if Penn State gives out 100 scholarships for athletes, now the number is more than that, much more, then that means that they have to give out for men's sports, 100 scholarships for men's sports, they have to give out 100 scholarships for women's sports. This topic is just, it really upsets me because when this came into effect, it killed many, many wrestling programs and many, many smaller men's sports, such as wrestling, which is obviously not as big as football. Killed wrestling programs, killed swimming programs, some lacrosse programs at these different colleges, some golf programs, which is very upsetting because the thing is, these football programs, the max number of scholarships they can give out is 85. So if Alabama gives out 85 football scholarships, now they have to find 85 women's scholarships to give out. And there aren't as many women's sports, just statistically speaking, as the men's sports. So the men's sports, the lower ones, kind of lose out. And this is where wrestling lost out. What happened is in the 1980s, this is really, really interesting stat. In the 1980s, there were 146 collegiate wrestling teams. Today, there are about 80 teams. Now that number is growing a bit, but this number was cut in half because of Title IX, and that's really, really upsetting. Now let's they're cutting programs left and right. Last year, of course, Eastern Michigan was nixed. You may know Perry, who wrestled there last year, 141 pounds, made a real statement at nationals. Well, he found out when he got home from national tournament that his program was no longer available next year, and he could transfer out. So sad. So let's get into a little bit of the history of the SEC wrestling, though, which I thought was pretty cool. So back in around the 50s through the 80s, there were some SEC wrestling teams. There was an Auburn wrestling team, which was one of the biggest, but there was Auburn, Louisiana, Florida, Kentucky, and Georgia. A lot of these lasted, the big SEC conference in wrestling was from the 70s to the 80s. And this was started in 1969 by what they call the Dean of Southern Wrestling. His name was Coach Arnold Swede Umbach and Tom Milkovich. So these two were really the fathers of SEC wrestling. And they set out to expand their programs at Florida, Auburn, and show, just get some guys out there. So the major teams were Auburn, Louisiana, and as I said, but these teams, they did have programs. Now, how well did they do? That's another topic, which, they actually did decently well. From the time, the SEC produced 23 All-Americans in those years. Now, I'm going from the 70s to the 80s because that's when there was an actual Southeastern Athletic Conference. The SEC, there were actually, throughout those 10, 11 years, there were 23 All-Americans. How many NCAA champs? 0. Now, Auburn had a few on the outskirts of the years, but they weren't a part of the actual conference, just to make a little bit of an adjustment there. Now, the only team to host the national tournament, SEC team to host the national tournament, was Auburn, and they hosted the national tournament in 1971. So when you're looking through those national title sites and you see Auburn on there, you may be a bit confused, but this is pretty interesting. Now, the Auburn program lived on for 27 years. They tried to resurrect this program actually multiple times with donors who had said they would donate, upwards of $100,000, but the school said no. And why? Because of those two words I just said, Title IX. They didn't have the available scholarships to give to these wrestling programs as they did because the football programs are so massive. Auburn has, one of the biggest football programs in the country. When you think Texas A&M, University of Texas, Alabama, their football programs are so massive that it doesn't allow for growth in other sports, which is kind of upsetting. And it's not the football program's fault, it's Title IX's fault. So I want to see the SEC come back with a wrestling program. Imagine if Alabama had a wrestling program. How dominant they are in football, having back-to-back national championships, a few over the past 10 years. They're always in that hunt for a title. Imagine how good their wrestling team could be. These big schools, they have the money to put into the program. We've seen Missouri, which is a relatively newer team. They've made an impact on the wrestling community because they have a good football program. They have a big budget as far as the school goes. It makes a lot of money, and that they can put some of that into the wrestling program. So it's really disheartening that because of this Title IX, we don't get to see those SEC teams. But the one thing, I mentioned Missouri. They are the only team with that's actually in the SEC as in football that has a wrestling program. So that's the answer to that trivia question. But let me know what you think of Title IX. Is it complete BS, or is there some legitimacy to it? I really want to know your answers because this is something that's really, really upsetting to me. So that's that. And let's move on to the final topic of the day, which is another fan question, which comes from H-Man the Sixth. He says, I've heard people say that Spencer Lee has become a less dominant force at 125 pounds. Do you think you can make a video about this? So, yeah, H-Man the Sixth. This is an interesting question. One I've heard a couple of people talk about. Now, before you get mad at Iowa fans, I'm going to go into the statistics all about last year's Spencer Lee versus this year's Spencer Lee. And is he doing as well? And you may be a bit surprised by what you find out. So let's get into this. So last year, Spencer Lee started wrestling in December of 2017. He was pulled out. He wrestled in the UNI Open, and he wrestled for the first time at Tash in January of 2018 against Michigan State. Michigan State versus Iowa duel. He won the match, and he became a force to reckon with at the national tournament. Of course, he won a national title in 2018. He's in the hunt again this year, but is he as dominant? So let's get into these stats. So right now, Spencer Lee's record is 14-1. Last year, his overall record, only wrestling, he didn't wrestle the full year. He had a couple months. He didn't wrestle in November, December, but his full record was 22-2. Now, what's interesting, so his record 14-1 now. Up to this point in the season, his record last year was 11-1. So he has a couple more wins. Of course, he had wrestled a couple more matches here and there, but 11-1. So right now, we're pretty on key. As far as decisions go, last year he had 4 decisions, but 2 up to this point. And right now, in this season, he has 2 up to this point. As far as major decisions, last year he had 0 up till February. He had 1 by the end of the year, and he has 2 so far this season. Tech Falls, just going right down this list, majors, decisions, majors, Tech Falls, he had 8 total and 5 up to February. Right now, he has 6. And as far as pins goes, he had 9 and 4 up until February. And right now, with the massive pin that he got this past weekend, he has 4 pins. So his stats are actually just a bit better as far as dominance goes. He has as many pins as he did last year. He has 1 more tech fall up to this point. Major decisions, he has more major decisions. He has the same amount of decisions. So really, is he less dominant? No. Has he wrestled this tough competition? Arguable. But right now, last year, his big wins of the season were against Sean Russell, number 10, Piccinini, who's number 8, NATO, Lezak, and Rivera, who he actually beat last year. He lost to, notably, Bresser and NATO. This year, in NATO, of course, he beat as well, but he lost to him. And then this year, his wins are notable wins against Sean Russell and Patrick Glory. Of course, this season, he lost to Sebastian Rivera. We'll see him get revenge. So, really where this stems from, H-Man, where this stems from is that people are wondering if because of Rivera, because of Lee's previous matches against Rivera, if Lee is less dominant. Because as I have here just where these guys were last year. So last year, he beat Rivera twice. Lee beat Rivera 7-4, and then he beat him 12-0. So he had a decision and a major. He beat him pretty handedly. And people are wondering, this year he lost to Rivera. So is he less dominant? Well, what I could say is, didn't Rivera just get better? Could Rivera have trained more? Could he have trained more so that he could beat Spencer Lee, so he could get that national championship? And I say, yeah, he absolutely could have done that. And I don't think it's any less dominance in Lee. Does that mean Lee trained less? No. Lee's probably training just as hard, if not harder, than he did last year, because he wants to be a 4-timer. He wants to be a 4-time national champ, and it could very well happen. I don't believe that Lee is less dominant than he was. Now, what's interesting is after Spencer Lee wrestled at Midlands, he was interviewed, and this is what he said. He said, "Some people don't know what you're going through, and you just have to fight through it." So this is a little bit telling as far as, what if Spencer Lee's battling something, whether it's an injury, a sickness. We saw Spencer Lee battle sickness in his senior year of high school, or not injury rather, up until the national finals. He had a torn ACL for most of the season, and he ended up wrestling Desanto. Desanto, who's now his teammate, actually handed Spencer Lee his first and only college loss in the PIAA state finals. So Lee was battling an injury there. Another notable wrestler who was battling an injury this past year in 2018 was Yanni, who he came out after nationals. He had a torn ACL, and he wrestled and won a national championship. So, is that the best thing to do? Maybe, maybe not. But these guys, they're in it to win gold, and that's completely understandable. Spencer Lee, I don't believe he's less dominant, and from the stats that I kind of read off, he's not less dominant. He's actually just on pace, if not a little bit more dominant this season. So to everybody saying that he's less dominant, check the stats. He's a great wrestler. Especially, I believe, is out to win another national title. Honestly, he's my pick to win a national title, and I think he'll do really well come March. And everybody, that'll do it for today's Fanco Wrestling Show. I appreciate you checking out the video and commenting along with what you want to see. Make sure you comment below with what you want to see next in next week's show and what you thought about all of today's topics. Please let me know. And that'll do it for the Fanco Wrestling Show this week.